Hi, I'm Toine, and welcome to my kitchen. Before I get started with cooking, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because this is, after all, my first video. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and ever since I was a little kid, I was obsessed with becoming a chef. Every year for Carnival, I would dress up as a chef, and I believe there will be a picture over here showing me as a little kid. As I got older, I started to realize that I was too picky an eater to become a chef. So I decided to change goals and careers, and in the end I ended up studying computer science at the Hogeschool van Utrecht. There I got very excited about electronics and computers and programming. As a matter of fact, that is where my job is right now. I'm a product manager at an electronics and software company. In 1995 I moved to the United States, and even though I loved eating all the local food around here where I lived, and there was so much variety, I did definitely miss my mom's home cooking. So I would often call her up and find out some of the recipes that she used to make. And I would start making them here. Then for work, my coworkers and I started going to Amsterdam for 2 weeks a year to visit a trade show. As a Dutch citizen, I became the de facto tour and food guide. When we had some time, I would take people sightseeing, or I would tell them where to go. But at night, we would all go out to dinner together, and I got to pick the restaurant. I would take them to traditional Dutch restaurants where we would eat the foods that my mom and my grandma used to cook. But I would also take them to modern Dutch restaurants where innovative chefs had made new spins of those old favorites. And of course, I couldn't go to Amsterdam and not take them to an Indonesian restaurant. We would feast on a 27-dish rijsttafel, and to my surprise, everyone loved every one of those restaurants. This is when I realized that Dutch food had more appeal than I had given it credit for. So with the pandemic and us spending more time at home, I decided that maybe it was a good idea to start a cooking channel and a recipe site. So this is my cooking channel, and my recipe site is toineskitchen.com. I'll put the link down below. On this channel, I will cook the kinds of food I grew up with, the food my mom used to cook, or my grandma. I will also include some dishes from some of the Netherlands' former colonies, such as Indonesia. And I will probably have some German and other European dishes in there as well, because my mom did used to cook those kinds of food as well, even though it isn't traditionally Dutch. Today I'll be cooking pasteitjes. This food growing up was special occasion only. My mom would make it for us to eat after midnight mass on Christmas Eve, and sometimes for the Easter brunch. But it wasn't a every week or even every month kind of recipe. It is quite delicious though. It has this flaky, crusty cup made of puff pastry and this warm gravy with tender meat inside. And I understand my mom didn't make it all the time because it does take quite a bit of time. Normally I cook this over 2 days. I will start the meat and the broth the day before, and then I will make the pastries and the roux and everything together on the second day. But with a little bit of planning, you can do this in a single day. Now that I live in the United States though, whenever I go visit my mom, she will gladly make me a pasteitje, even if it's just a regular Tuesday. The recipe that I'll be cooking today is really a double portion. The reason for that is because for next week's video, I'll be making one of the Netherlands' most famous bar snacks. And if you want to be notified when that video comes out, please click the subscribe button below. First, let's start make the meat and the broth. So for this, you'll need 1 kilogram of brisket, that is 2.2 pounds. You'll need 1.5 liters of water, a bay leaf, and 2 bouillon cubes. I'll be using an Instant Pot to make this today because it is so much quicker than putting a pot on the stove. However, if you don't have an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker, you can go to my website and see instructions on how to make this on the stovetop. Before we put the brisket in the Instant Pot, we need to trim all the fat and silver skin off it. This one has a lot of fat on it, so it's going to take me a little effort to take it off there. But trim as much as you can. After you're done trimming the fat, put the brisket in the Instant Pot. Add a bay leaf and 1.5 liters of water. 1.5 liters is approximately 1.5 quarts of water. I'm sorry, I still think in metric. I'm using bouillon cubes for this recipe because that's how my mom did it. However, if you want to make a proper stock, simply roast some onions, celery, and carrots, as well as some shank bones in the oven add them to the pot with the brisket, the bay leaf, and maybe a little bit more water, and cook it a little bit longer than an hour. After I've added everything to the Instant Pot, I can turn it on high pressure for an hour. When it's done cooking, let it sit for at least 15 minutes. After you've let it sit and depressurize on its own for at least 15 minutes, move the venting lever from sealing to venting. Watch out, there will be steam coming out of it. Let all the steam escape and then simply open the lid and take out the brisket and put it on a plate. One of the downsides of cooking in an Instant Pot or a pressure cooker is that water doesn't boil down. It's a benefit as well, but I like my broth to be a little bit more concentrated. So set the Instant Pot on saute mode for high and let it sit and let it boil away until you are about 2/3 of the level of broth that you were before. That should be about a liter or a quart. Now, cut your brisket into small cubes. I cut them about a 1/2 inch by a 1/2 inch by a 1/2 inch. Always make sure that you remove any fat that was still left behind, because it isn't pleasant to eat that. And even though some of those cubes you're cutting will fall apart, that's not a problem. Once the broth is reduced to about a quart or a liter, turn off the Instant Pot. Let it cool down a little bit and stir the bouillon cubes through it. Again, if you're making broth the old-fashioned way and you've added some of the roasted vegetables and shank bones, you don't have to add a bouillon cube. But if you do, stir it through there and make sure it is fully dissolved. Let the broth cool down a little bit and add it in an airtight container. Put that airtight container in the fridge, put your meat in an airtight container, and put that in the fridge as well. While the meat and broth are cooling down in the refrigerator, let's start making the puff pastry cups. I'm only going to make 4 puff pastry cups because I'm going to use half of the ragout recipe, the filling, for next week's bar snack. Let's get started. What do we need to make these pastry cups? Well, first of all, we need puff pastry. I am using store-bought puff pastry today because I didn't want to go through the hassle of making the puff pastry myself. You'll also need an egg to make an egg wash with, some milk and some salt. The salt really helps the egg wash lose those long stringy bits and makes it really smooth. Grab a pastry brush and a little bit of water as well. You'll need that. First, lightly flour your work surface, just enough to prevent the dough from sticking. Then, lay your dough down and carefully unroll everything, including the edges. Because we'll be stacking the dough later on, you want to make sure that you remember the direction. To do that, very gently put lines across the entire sheet of dough with a fork like this. Using your largest cutter, cut out 8 large circles from the dough. Try to waste as little of it as possible. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure of is that your dough cutter is very sharp. If it's dull, it will actually crimp the different layers together, preventing it from rising in the oven while baking and giving it that flaky texture. Using the smaller cutter, cut a small circle out of 4 of these. You're going to be creating rings. The small discs will be the lids, and the rings will be stacked on top of the other 4 large circles. Grab 2 parchment paper lined cookie sheets and put the large rings and the large circles on one of them and the small discs on the other. Be careful, don't overhandle the dough. You want to put this in the fridge for at least an hour to let the butter and the dough cool down. When you're ready to take it out of the fridge, crack an egg, add a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of milk. The salt will really help that egg wash to be very smooth. After you take your cookie sheet with the rings and large circles out of the fridge, it's time to start stacking them. With a pastry brush dipped in some water, just wet the outer edge of one of the large circles and then put one of the rings on top of it. Make sure that the lines that you made on the dough line up between the circle and the ring. Now, to prevent the center of it from rising, poke holes in it with your fork. In order to give the top of the cup a little bit of a shine, use your pastry brush dipped in egg wash and just carefully brush the egg wash on the top of the ring. Don't get any of it on the sides. That will prevent it from rising in the oven. Brush the small circles with some egg wash as well and put all of them back in the fridge for at least 10 minutes. Now it's time to bake them. Bake them in the oven at the temperatures that are on the package. I typically put the cups in first and then 10 minutes later add the discs because they cook so much faster. Now that we have finished the pastries and the beef and the broth has cooled off in the fridge, it's time to make ragout. What you'll need is 120 grams of unsalted butter, 120 grams of all-purpose flour, some nutmeg, I prefer fresh, some vinegar, some mustard, and salt and pepper. The first step is melt the butter on the stove. So put a large saucepan on a low flame on the stove and add your butter. Make sure it's fully melted, but not browning or, even worse, burnt. Stir in the flour until it's fully combined. Then keep cooking it and stirring it for at least 5 minutes. You want to make sure that you don't end up with that raw flour taste in your final product. After 5 minutes of stirring, it should kind of look like white sand, a little bit grainy, kind of like a pie dough almost. Now it's time to add the broth. You want to do this slowly and in about 4 stages because you want to make sure it is fully combined and not lumpy. So for me, it's approximately 1 ladle to be a quarter of the broth. So increase your burner to about medium and slowly add 1 ladle of your broth to the mixture. Keep stirring it. You'll see it will become a big ball of dough almost. When you're at that point, add the second ladle slowly. Keep stirring. You want to make sure that there are no lumps in this. When you are done adding all of the broth, keep stirring it until it reaches a boil for about 3 to 5 minutes. You want it to be the consistency that it coats the back of the spoon, but when you run your finger across it, it doesn't fill right back in. If it is too thick, you may have to add a little bit more water or broth, if you have some, until it hits that consistency. Now it's time to season the roux. So start by grating in a little bit of nutmeg. Be careful, don't do too much because nutmeg is an overpowering flavor and you don't want that to be the main taste. Now add about 1 to 2 teaspoons of vinegar and 1 to 2 teaspoons of mustard. The goal of this is to just brighten up the flavor of the roux a little bit, but not make it an overpowering flavor. You shouldn't be tasting mustard or vinegar when you take a bite. Now season with salt and pepper. I'm using freshly cracked black pepper. After you have seasoned and tasted the roux, it's time to add the beef. Slowly stir the beef in with the roux and keep stirring it until the beef is heated through. Now take a quick taste because we didn't season the beef when we put it in the broth. So you want to make sure that the combination of the roux and the meat still is seasoned properly. If it isn't, add some more salt or pepper and adjust the taste. That's it. You've made ragout. So we are now ready to plate. In order to plate it, you're going to take a little pastry cup and spoon in as much ragout as you can fit. And I typically like to have it just peek over the edge of it. Now put one of the little lids on top of it, almost like a crooked beret. And a sprig of parsley, and you're done. Eet Smakelijk. If you enjoyed watching me cook and talk about Dutch food, please like this video. If you want to be notified that there is a new video for you to watch, please click the subscribe button. Thank you.